here, no problem, like it never happened. So
Yep.
I'll start back over. Really, it just was we kind of just all we talked about was where we met. So I actually saw Nathaniel on one of Raging Atheist streams where he shot down Matt Powell, and that made me happy. And so I wanted to invite him on here. So I'll let him introduce his channel. It's called Divine Disbelief. I'll let him tell about it. You know, it's a pretty smaller channel, but they're growing. So anybody watching this should definitely go over there and subscribe. And I'll let him describe what he's doing over there.
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for having me on. I am Nathaniel, one half of Divine Disbelief. My partner, Susan, she's Susan Skeptitz Turpin in the chat. She is the other half. She's the one that actually made the cool graphic that you see, as well as pretty much everything else that we've ever done on the channel, almost everything that we've ever done when it comes to graphics and movement and stuff like that. I just kind of produce the show and do things like you just did. I've done that before. And right now we are on weekly Wednesdays at 5:30 Pacific, and we go over secular news and opinion, and then give some sort of opinion like based upon like what we're reading, and really kind of a little bit more insight if we've done some of the research on it. And we've evolved that a little bit, and now we actually have even more that we'd like to do. We now do things with like deep dive where we go over something every single week. I've usually done theology stuff or really historical religion. I don't really get into theology. That's what you do. And Susan recently has done stuff with like conversion therapy stuff. She went over like the history of contemporary Christian music. Not great, by the way. And has and I've done stuff with like the Gospel of Peter and the infancy Gospel of Thomas, things like that. There's things that people don't necessarily know about. And now we're evolving even a bit more. We have a premiere that is. I see myself in like conversion therapy stuff. She went over like the history. Is it me? I hope it's not me.
No, it's not. It's like I got.
Not great, by the way.
I think we're good now.
Cool. Well, while you're doing that, I see IQ and Mama Atheist and Math Pig and everybody else in the chat and Tony. It's so great to see you folks. I know we interact.
Appreciate everybody coming by.
Yeah, I know we interact, but it's on a regular basis, most of you. But it's still good to see you, anyways. And as you had mentioned before, yes, I studied really. Pre-world history in college with anthropology and paleoanthropology, but have recently moved away from that because I discovered something that I enjoy more. I never, as a former Christian, obviously, it's something that really interests me with the origins of Christianity, the trials Christianity has gone through, but not any like the newer stuff, right? I pretty much like. Mine ends right around like Theodosius, right? So like the end of the 4th century. And from that beginning stage with Christianity, I focus on the intertestamentals a little bit, some of those that are considered apocrypha. I mean, who decided that? And that's some of the stuff that we go over in our deep dives. And now we have stuff where we're doing like a premiere video where we're responding to a video that somebody made that we found chock full of errors. So it's kind of like counter apologetics, we call it that. But also we have a new like book club type thing that Susan named, and I can't remember the name, so she'll have it in the chat. And then also where we're going to have more and more guests come on. We had that before, kind of went away from it, and now we're kind of bringing that back to where we have guests come on that are secular, and we haven't really thought much about bringing people on with like religion that are still religious and stuff. Not that we're against it, but we've never actually necessarily spoken about it. So that's who we are. So
awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. So I guess I do want to say, like, so I kind of assumed at least at some point in your life you had to have been a Christian if you're studying New Testament. I can't imagine someone who just like was never a Christian. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's just So, were you a Christian like growing up, and have you been an atheist for a long time? What's that kind of look like?
Sure, that's a really, really good question. Oh, this is like so. This is one of two mugs that Susan and I have. She has the other one, and so this is like also a little bit of homage to. We were on. We had the opportunity to be on Atheist Pastor's channel the other day at 4:30 in the morning. What the heck, Australia?
Yeah.
And also, Mama Atheist is a big Star Wars fan, so more of that.
Nice.
Yes, I was a Christian. Now, um, my step parents and whatnot, the Northeast Nebraska is where we lived, and like they were. Grandpa was Methodist, sure, and I always thought it was really cool that kids carried those little candle things and they walked up to the front in the white robes or whatever. Still working that one out, and but I was never really actually religious. I went to like the things. Lived in Orchard, Nebraska, and my three brothers and I, we would go to these things at like the Methodist church in town, which is the one that would like ding at 12 o'clock every day, and so basically you knew what time of day it was. And I actually lost a bet because I thought it dinged a number of times, and nope, I was wrong. And um, and uh, but I wasn't actually like religious or anything. I don't even know if the Methodists really preach the salvation thing that evangelicals do. I forget.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Methodists. I know they're like one of the more liberal,
Yeah,
lighter. Yeah, I'm not super familiar.
yeah, they didn't even do like the catechism thing.
Yeah.
So then when I was oh hell, I don't know. I forget. I think I was a freshman or a sophomore. Had to have been a sophomore. No, it was a freshman.
In college?
I don't know. I was in high
Okay.
school.
Okay.
Um, and had some friends of mine who moved up from Kansas, and they moved into Orchard because why not go from one really flat and boring place to another? Hutchinson, Kansas is where they're from. They invited me out to like this I don't know, roller skating thing, which was still cool back in the day before you were born. And and I met a girl there, right? And so this girl showed interest in me. So obviously I was like, hey, freshman in high school, so interested for sure. And she invited me to church, and I thought at that point I was like, oh, great, this girl wants me to come to church. She definitely likes me. We're obviously gonna get married. And same. And I went to church. Turns out, by the way, no, she just wanted me to come to church because nefarious reasons. And I met the folks there. They were amazing, and they really were, and had this like atmosphere that I wasn't accustomed to. And I ended up becoming a Christian. The girl and I never dated. Oh, man. I don't even remember her name or anything about her. I'm pretty certain that I'm making up things about her based on a flawed memory. Um, and I ended up, becoming evangelical Christian. My mom moved us to Texas because she hates us, and I went from like Baptist church to evangelical church because I didn't see the difference or necessity of keeping with one or the other. And they were like, "Are you saved?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm saved. I got saved, in the whole speaking in tongues thing up in Nebraska, so obviously." And and that was I know I was like on like McDonald Baptist Church or something, and then I was like First Baptist or Cavalry Baptist. I don't know,
Mm.
and I'm probably on like all their rolls of like being totally saved, and I ended up settling down at a church called Community Church in Orange, Texas, and they're like they're one of those. It's like we're apostolic, but we're not Pentecostal, and I'm like that's the same thing. And from there, I went on like a mission trip out to Arizona with them and stuff, and really began, feeling who I was. And after I got out of the military, I actually became a youth pastor in Florida for a little while. Turned out I didn't like that very much, mostly because there's a lot of politics in church that folks don't know about. And I wasn't about just bringing more people in. I was something you and I were talking about earlier was that we don't necessarily care that a million people, we want to figure out content that people are going to like, but we don't necessarily care if a million people come to our channel or not. The same thing applies. It applied to me whenever I was a youth pastor at this church. I didn't care if 10 people showed up or 100. But the pastor of this church didn't feel the same, and I was like, I don't do that. And so I left that, and then I was still a Christian for a number of years after that, and then I realized that I was then I went to when I was in college and stuff. I figured out this is the only thing in my life that I have never really researched. I just kind of took it as it were on faith. Somebody told me something that was going to be correct. A pastor would never lie, and it turns out there were a lot of things that were not, let's just say, correct. And it was a really, really hard process for me as I went through a lot of other changes as well. And before I finally, like, literally sitting on the sidewalk one night on my way home, like, figured it out that I was just kind of like at that point lying to myself, that I still believed in something that I didn't. And it was an incredibly difficult, as I mentioned, time. And here I am. That was about 10 years ago, I think.
Okay. So you know that, yeah, I appreciate that. That was really like well thought out and really honest. That was nice. Thank you. So yeah, I'm kind of like processing, thinking about what you're saying. So you never really like, so since becoming an atheist is when you started like getting into really learning how this all started and like why that makes sense, kind of, like how did we get to this point, I guess, is kind of like what you're thinking, like how did the church get so big? Why? What did they actually believe? Are we still believing some of the same things, I guess is.
Yeah, figuring out figuring out that I don't believe a lot of things that are written in the Bible is different than figuring out how they got there.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing irreconcilable contradictions is one thing. Learning connections that somebody would make in order to craft a story is another, and that's what I've been focusing on for the better part of really a few years now. As with unbeknownst to even myself, as I continue to talk about, and Susan and I actually went out again, and we got some more fossils in like November. Continuing to do some of that stuff. My mind was continuing to shift over into more, and it makes sense because of how much I really enjoyed it when I was a Christian, more into like this scholarship side of things, and critical scholarship more than anything else. And I think it's hilarious when people think critical scholarship means that you're trying to find things wrong. No, it means being taking stuff and a critical look at something, and skeptical look is probably a better word for it.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily mean like atheists only do critical scholarship. Yeah, I think a lot of like Christians are afraid of that word for sure.
Yeah, it's what it sounds like, and it's kind of like whenever you hear critics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a critic wrote a great review about a movie. How? Because it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. And the majority of scholars that I know, especially with Christianity, are Christians. And in fact, I don't know very many that would state I don't believe in a God. And most of them, now obviously theologians are Christians, as they do, but most scholars, critical or otherwise, that I know are Christian. Those that are biblical inerrancy type folks, they're the most conservative of scholars, and they're the ones that do a lot of the type of like the pre-sup apologists that we were kind of talking about before the stream, but also this idea of it has to be inerrant, otherwise it's not. And they make up some of the most, how did you make this up type apologist stuff and apologetics, and I'm like, really? So they craft Greek words in such a way that it's like, did you even talk to the Greeks about this? So
do you know? Can you like read Greek?
I can read a fair amount of it. Speaking it, not yet.
Yeah, you want to? That's the goal.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's important to learn the classical Greek as well as the modern Greek in an ability to really get down to a level of of scholarship, to where it's not just talking about what these words say, but what they meant. And this is where we also get into like a historical vision or viewpoint with the text, and this is what somebody would have actually said at this point, instead of And what do we look at something that would have been like a like something that's pseudographical or something pseudepigraphical, and how can we figure that out based on the textual variants and stuff? And you can't view that just by reading Greek from a like a very like
Okay. Yeah.
macro view. There has to be like a very much a micro view of it, and it's something that I am striving for. I know that Susan will tell you that. I read the Bible more than most Christians, and for the past um, 3 weeks now, I have been completely zoomed in on like three verses in the Bible,
Where at
and
exactly? Yeah, I'm curious.
yeah, Luke chapter 2 verses 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. You could go like really 1 to 5 if you want, but really that's been like hyper focused on that these past few weeks, and that has to do with the Lucan census that's in regarding the birth of Jesus, and kind of going into that and stuff, and really kind of researching that, seeing what words are used, seeing the historical context, and those types of things. So
Jeez, that's wild. Yeah, so I've been a Christian for like 3 years now, 3.5 years, and before that, I really like. I mean, I could say you've obviously done more biblical research and read the Bible more than I have. That's for sure. So like hearing these things is super interesting, and I don't like I hold my views on Christianity because like I just I mean I'm sure you would have said the same thing when you were a Christian. You have these experiences, and I'm not going to deny that I'm sure you would have said the same thing. And I don't want to say like I hold my faith like completely or like have faith, just blind faith or whatever, because I am doing research, but whatever, you know what I mean? You can't like at some point I felt like I made it, like I felt like I was a Christian, and now I'm like going down the research, and I'm definitely like open to changing my views, but everybody says that, I'm obviously like somewhat stuck in my views, I think it's true.
yeah.
So, and I don't think there's really anything wrong with that. I think there's something wrong with like lying to everybody and saying that, that's what I was thinking about. I think a lot of people say like they're super open to the truth. All I do is follow the evidence. Like everybody has, you made a decision at some point in your life to believe something, and it is going to take a lot of effort to change that belief. And I don't have any problem saying that. I think this is true, so I believe it. But as I do some more of this research, and I know I mentioned to you, I watched that video with Laura Robertson on Pine Creek's channel, and she was like, I guess what you would call a critical scholar, but a Christian, and that was super eye-opening and interesting to me. I've heard these things in passing, but I haven't done enough research to really like say what I hold to as far as inerrancy and what actually happened and what didn't happen. And it was cool hearing that. And I'd love to I'm trying to think if there were like any specific points from there I could ask you about. I don't know. I'm not like drawing it off the top of my head, but I know like, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds. I feel like that would just be a waste of, but whatever. Yeah, I'm just like thinking there's so much like, I wish I had your knowledge in my head. How do I do that?
No, you don't. No, you really don't.
Yeah,
it's. I was talking to Susan about that yesterday because I remember things in a fashion that I don't think many others do. I don't know how that I'm able to remember things and to recall things. I don't. It's not on purpose, and for me. I it also leads to a lot of different drilling down type rabbit hole things too. I didn't realize that I would be reading about Pax Romana earlier today, even where we're talking
know
about
what that is.
It's the full expansion of the Roman Empire from about 49 BCE and for about 100 years really until let's call it 65 CE, where you had the second Augustus, and then you had Tiberius and Octavius and things like that. And which included, of course, the annexation of Iudea and all of the rest of what is now, let's consider it, Palestine and Judea and Israel and all that, and then into like they called it really the peaceful time of the Roman Empire. I guess peaceful more so than most times, and. And this is just simply while I'm reading something in in the second chapter of the book of Luke, and trying to parse out as much information as I can, so when I say something, I'm saying it with the amount of not just knowledge but competency as I possibly can, and making sure that I'm not missing something, because I don't recommend the inerrancy route, by the way, because I can tell you it's not. Um,
Yeah, inerrancy from what I like seems just like could see myself holding to a more like infallibility and what it intends to
sure.
teach, and I don't know exactly how that like works itself out. But inerrancy just seems, and I know like a lot of skeptics or atheists where when you say infallibility, like how do you know what it's intending to teach and what it's not or whatever, you know. But I think inerrancy for sure seems like
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem to work out.
No, yeah, I don't recommend that. I think that, and I believe that we're going to show very specifically the reason that the Lucan census is not, it's not, it's full of errors. Um, that also, of course, goes into the beginning of the first chapter of Luke as well, where we're talking about two entirely different time frames, either Herod or Quirinius, and but a person. I think the important side of this, and this is something that I hope that we're able to stress, and that I hope that I can stress to you right now, is you can first off, that's a very good Mike Lacona view to have. I think that he holds it. That's him saying, um, it's not without error or contradiction, but its message is inerrant. And I think that's a fair position to take, to say that, sure, there may be, like, I think that somebody could say Luke got it. The author of the Gospel of Luke got this wrong, um, historically speaking. I mean, he starts very specifically in the first chapter where he says that many have undertaken, meaning that many others had written something. Many others, which are now lost to history, have written this stuff. I have done all this research, and this is what he's talking to Theophilus. This is what I have come up with, and and one can say he gets this wrong and still be a Christian, right? One can say that Matthew got it wrong and still be a Christian. It's perfectly. I think that's perfectly fine. We get things wrong in history all the time, and yet we still have like here you go, America. We've done messed up a lot recently too, and yet still an American. Um, Not wanting to necessarily move somewhere else, right? It's a rough analogy to make, but it's still a connection that we have. And I think that somebody could say that the words, even if the words of Jesus are not exactly as he spoke, which I think would be impossible to write down.
Yeah, I mean, it was assuming he spoke in Aramaic anyway,
Yes.
and it was
Yes.
written in wrote. What am I? From
You're fine.
Texas, right? No, but it was written in Greek, so I mean, it's clearly not the exact words he said. So
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely not, especially if one were to consider the Sermon on the Mount, which, again, I believe is in one of the Gospels. And there is no way that a person can remember all of those words in exact detail. It simply is impossible. Our brains don't work that way. They don't store memories that way. By the way, here's a better example. Somebody could understand that we were wrong about the dinosaurs in the beginning, regarding non-avian, and things have changed since then. But we still accept that dinosaurs existed and they died at this point, right? So there's a better analogy, I think, that they're not still around, nor were they around 6,000 years ago.
yeah, I'm definitely not a young Earth creationist. You don't have to worry
Good.
about that.
And I think that, but getting the message of what Jesus would have said, and saying this is, I think that a person could still be justified holding a position. Now, I think it's more difficult for a person to say this is actually what happened on 15 or 16 Nissan, right? This is this is the actual historical event. I think that one bears more of a burden of proof. Being born is fairly mundane. There's right now somebody is born, and also probably right now. It's kind of like Jeff Bezos making more money than we ever will, like right now and right now. Also, people born. The more difficult part of that is, I think, reconciling what we have historically regarding people
Mm-hmm.
not staying dead. That's a new one, and I think that if a person is a Christian, I think that one is reconciling that with history, especially with irreconcilably contradictory accounts, which one is correct, which one made a mistake. If that one made the mistake there, how can I, what else can I look at here with these other, like the passion narrative stuff? I think that one is more difficult than uh, speaking about the birth thing. Now, the reason that we're responding to making a premiere video with the response is because somebody is defending the inerrancy of Luke. Don't recommend, and so we're doing that. But the other side of it is more difficult, I think.
Okay, yeah, and I'd love to like continue this conversation, like as I could do, because I clearly like you could destroy me with the amount of research you've done. I'm not gonna sit here and try to defend my point, but I would love to like keep the conversation going in the future too, and like as I do more research and see where we're at, because I think like we both clearly, I mean, this we haven't been talking too long, but I feel like we can have a decent conversation, so that's pretty cool. And,
Yeah, it doesn't mean I'm right either. I could be wrong.
yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, I would love to like challenge you on a few points and like ask, just see where it's at, just see where the conversation leads. But as a like, I mean, yeah, it's just there's a lot to look into. There's a lot of like people saying one thing and then you see, and I think like the more I started this channel and I didn't really want to be an apologetics channel. And I always, and now the more and more I like look into apologetics, especially with that interview too, that Laura Robertson, she talked about this, how like apologists are just, and I knew they were like a little overly confident, but the more I look into it, I mean, there is some stuff that there's some things that I, even like as a Christian, I hate to say it, I mean, people are basically lying, where they are lying, not even basically lying, like they're lying about certain things, the way they're so confident in apologetics. I think that's a problem. It just, I mean, if it's not true, you're just leaving. The way I see it, you're leaving the door open for to be proven wrong. I mean, people like you are not stupid. You know what I mean? You're not gonna just like, oh, I guess these Christians got it. I might as well give up.
Well, I think that more than anything, and I know the phrase you use, but I always say this anyways. It of course has to do with being diligent. I'm by no means more intelligent than anybody else. But rather being diligent and honest. Intellectual honesty is so important. I could be completely dishonest in everything that I say, and yet intellectually honest with how I'm presenting it, right? And so that's important. And yes, I don't know anybody that's an atheist that would ever say Lee Strobel was a Christian or was an atheist.
Yeah.
Right? I've never met one, and it's like his. Oh yeah, you watch the thing on Pine Creek, right? It's just she makes that that connection without saying it so many times. With speaking about how slanted the book is, and and how dishonestly it is written. That's the important side of it. If I read these apologetics books, I don't care there's 25,000 or whatever manuscripts when 9/10 of them are written in 12 and 1300. I really don't care. I care about what was originally written. So scrap that entire chapter, from a crazy book. I really hate these intelligent design proponents, only because it leads into for some people into this young Earth creationism, which I think is child abuse. If taught to children, which
I have a huge problem with young Earth creationism.
Yeah, but I think that apologists and somebody that I've debated a couple of different times, Dean Meadows, he's an apologist. He's an interesting fella, and he and I think are what we talked about yesterday. We're debating again this time about whether or not the disciples and the early apostles were martyred for their faith. Spoiler, no.
Yeah, and, so you think none of them were?
No, not that we have evidence for. It doesn't mean that they weren't.
Not
but we don't
even
have
James?
No, not at all. Well, depending on which James you're talking about.
Yeah,
you're
talking
about
the brother of Jesus?
No, there's no evidence of that. Nor Peter being on a cross, or especially upside down on a cross. I'm certain the Romans would have been like, sure, we'll put you upside down. No. And also given a full sermon while upside down on a cross in Rome. Come on. Or the idea that Paul was martyred in Rome in 64, talking about Nero and the Great Fire and nonsense like that. And, all these things. No, I'm fairly certain that we don't have any evidence that any of them were. And I think that's going to be early next year. I think yesterday, North Carolina somewhere. I don't know. That's where he's from. So
Okay,
um,
yeah.
better than debating in Texas again. We'll make it around. So
Do you like doing live debates? I guess is what like
it
that's.
is. I have wanted for a considerable amount of time to do a debate in a church. Uh, and now been given the opportunity to do that, and I am overjoyed uh, because I don't know for whatever reason it's exciting to me to go into a building where I know that people are hoping to see just a complete destruction of the atheist. It doesn't matter I'm an atheist, and I don't know. It's to me, it's like going into a opposing team's
Mm-hmm.
football stadium, and I'm like revel in that
Yeah.
stuff. And I don't know why it's so exciting to me, but I've wanted to for a while, and now having that, so it's you
No, I've started like yeah. I mean, that was my intro into YouTube. Was I did a debate, and I mean, I definitely wasn't as prepared as I needed to be, but it's pretty fun. Like, I mean, it's like a sporting event, when it gets down to it. I mean,
yeah
it could be fun if done right. They can turn into a dumpster fire and not be very fun, but
yeah I've seen that recently. So
yeah.
uh, and really it's. What I hope to do. Don't worry, I'm never prepared, and like as prepared as I want to be either. So, and Susan again can tell you that you know, night after night, I'll be laying like in bed, with multiple books, and like looking over at Susan and being like, "Babe, I don't know, I don't know that I have this information. I don't know that, that I can remember this source and cite this immediately." And all the time, she's like, "Stop it. You got it," and she's been right every time, which makes sense. So
Hmm.
yeah, and I know I feel that what you're saying with having some of that and you get up into it. I get stage fright every time when I go on there and get adrenaline and stuff, and then I just settle in, and usually it works.
Yeah, that's
So
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. We kind of talked a little bit about like historicity of the New Testament. We touched on. So I mean, are you going? Are you like in a university right now? Are you like going to school? Are you like working towards that?
Not currently in school. No, it is something that I want to get back into. Um, Difficult right now, as you're probably aware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll
I
see my
want to.
Clemson Paul behind me, but I still don't have a degree from there either. So I
No,
know what
it's
that's like. It's once you get away from school for a minute, it gets really hard to get back.
yeah, and with current things going on in the world,
Mm-hmm.
it's it makes it more difficult as well as you know uh, got to find somewhere really the schools that I'll be looking at have to do with like divinity and religious studies, and history of Christianity and stuff. Most of those are at theological seminaries. Most of those are at schools of divinity and stuff. Most of those East Coast, and I don't want to move to the East Coast. And so looking for somewhere first off that'll accept me um, for advanced degree placement, but also somewhere that I can do this online, if at all possible. So there's you know
Okay.
there's a few roadblocks as well as time to do it right now. Um, Going for a degree like that is very time consuming, and and then of course having the wherewithal to finish that type of thing. So
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah. I can only imagine. I mean, getting my bachelor's degree was a challenge. I can't even imagine getting a PhD. But
mhm.
so we kind of talked about So how come like you just? I guess we did talk about. I'm just like thinking like New Testament over Old Testament. Were you ever in? Did you ever like consider really, or you're more into just like the theology and the church itself, like Christianity, and less about like Old
Mm.
Testament?
um, sure. How many books are in the Bible?
60, well, a lot more. I guess you're gonna say there's 66, like I'll say, but there could be a lot more.
Sure. Well, yeah, in the current um, Protestant Bible, there are 66. And of course, if you read some of the Apocrypha and stuff, there's different numbers. Um, how many books do Christians actually care about?
Yeah, like 6 or 7 of them.
Yeah, most of which are pseudepigraphical. but the 27 that make up the New Testament are the most important in Christianity. Even if you were to take the Gospels and put them into one, and then even if you were to take the 6 books that were not written by Paul and remove those, and then the books that were supposedly written by Peter and remove those, and then the book of Revelation, which is written by, I don't know, and get rid of that, which is it's the antithesis of everything that's written in the Bible, of the New Testament. The book of Revelation is the craziest book. And even if you removed all of those, and the Johns and the Jude and the Hebrews, and we have no idea who wrote those, you still have the foundation of an amazing religion. And I know a first century, maybe the first 3/4 of the first century in Palestine, you can see some of the history that's there. And realistically, it is these are the most important books in Christianity. And you can remove everything in the Old Testament. And because without these books, there is no Christianity. You still have Judaism, but you wouldn't have Christianity. And so that's always, been my focus. Now, there are supposed connections to the Old Testament, which I think are laughably incoherent, but the writings themselves are sometimes very poetic. Sometimes there are songs, like the one that Paul cites in Philippians 4, and the way that they speak, and then the foundations of this religion have always been more appealing because it is the birth of Christianity. And then, of course, looking at the pseudepigraphical stuff, the forgery stuff, and reading the polemics that are built into them, and then reading further on from that and seeing its placement in Rome opposite the pagan religions, even Apollonius of Tyana, who was more popular than Jesus, and they were around like pretty much the same time. And then reading how that all kind of went down over the course of the first 4-5 centuries. Spoiler alert: there's a lot of death involved, and a lot of politics and stuff. So Christianity's been involved in politics for a long time. And, and seeing all of that has always been very, very intriguing to me, because it set the foundation of our modern society, with Jesus being the most important person in modern history. So that's more likely why. Also, have you ever tried to read numbers? I mean, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I do, pretty interested in Old Testament stuff. I listen to or read and listen to a lot of Michael Heiser. I'm sure you're familiar with who that is. Mm-hmm. And yeah. He's big on New or Old Testament stuff. So, mm-hmm. But yeah, obviously reading Leviticus is not as much fun as diving into Romans or something like that, I'm assuming. So.
Yeah, not at all. Now, I do know it. I know the Old Testament. I know what it says. I know that Micah 5:2 doesn't stand alone by itself. Sorry, Matthew. And I know all the, I sometimes in live stream conversation with people that are Christians, I sometimes test their knowledge of the Bible. Most Christians know more about being a Christian than they do about the actual Bible. I would say that's the vast majority, probably over 95%.
Oh, and yeah.
And so there's some surprise when we actually look at things that are in the Bible and making those kind of connections. And rarely do I actually attempt to trap people with questions. I sometimes do. There are times when I'd want to, yes, and I do it. But I rarely actually have leading questions that trap people. I like to gain insight into knowledge so we can actually have an honest conversation with folks. And it's unfortunate that the conversations that I have regarding the Bible, and again, I know it pretty well, are immediately when I start speaking with the person, they're automatically on the defensive. I don't want that. Because at that point, then we're not speaking honestly. I've been in a conversation where, a person has directed the entire conversation, and I've realized it and have said, okay, I need to stay on this, honest perspective. And I don't, lead me wherever you want to go. I'm going to be honest in my answers. How many times people ask me how the universe began, and I go, oh. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Neither do you, and that's okay. You know, um, and I appreciate when I'm able to speak to folks and have a great math big, and actually have an honest conversation. When I'm even if I am looking to show them uh, where even if I'm looking and my goal is to show where they see something that's not biblical, like kind of like where in the Bible, in the New Testament, especially in the Gospels, where they say Jesus is God, and I'm like, okay, show me where that's the case. And
You
it's
don't
like,
think the New Testament claims that Jesus is God?
oh, I don't think Jesus claimed to be God. That's different. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, people can think that Jesus is God. Um, Paul very specifically thought that Jesus was an angel, which is deified, if you will, but didn't think him the exact same as God. And so he had a lower, call it a Christology, uh, lower view of Christ's
Even
Christology.
yeah, even like considering like is it like Philippians 4, the karma Christi, or is that
Yeah,
like
yeah, that
you
Paul.
even don't think that claims that like Paul's not claiming there that Jesus is God? Like even
Um,
though he knew or equality with God was not something to be grasped, he emptied himself.
sure. Yeah, Paul didn't write that. Paul was citing that. It's kind of like 1 Corinthians 15, where he writes the pre-Pauline Creed. Yeah, he didn't write that. That was something he was quoting.
Okay,
Um,
so you're saying nothing that Paul penned claims
mhm.
that Jesus is God.
Correct. He does say that Jesus is an angel, though, very specifically, and that is in Galatians 5, verse 2. Um, and he says that you didn't receive me as somebody who is lost or whichever. He said, but you received me as Jesus as an angel. And I know where the apologetic to that is too. It's kind of funny, um, because say, well, they mean that we received you as Jesus or as an angel. Now, Paul, of course, would have written that because Paul was a phenomenal writer, which is why we can see in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 1, he does the exact same thing with speaking to the folks in Corinth. He said, "I'm not writing to you as though you are, these, like have a great foundation, but as new and like new from the flesh as infants," which obviously right there it means the same thing. And that also we see whenever he's reciting that the poem or the hymn that's in Philippians chapter 4, you have the but as type thing, and that's how the reason he put that in there is because we can see that there's a lower Christology built into that. Even if one were to say came from God or from the Father, which Jesus specifically says, even in the book of John, um, we look at that and we can see that it's not actually speaking about Jesus being one with God from the beginning, um, but rather begotten of God. And
So
I
you
think,
think that yeah, and not to cut you out, I'm just like trying not to lose. So like that begotten, you don't.
I know there's a lot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. I just like so the begotten, you don't like how I've heard that's basically a mistranslation. It should be like the monogenes theos or whatever, which is like the
Mhm.
unique and one of a kind. Am I like off base here?
No, he certainly was one of a kind. Absolutely. But if we look at Luke chapter 3, right, it gives the genealogy of Jesus. Who do you know who the last person on that list is?
No, go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's Adam. And guess what Luke calls Adam? The son of God,
Okay.
right? And then if we go back and we look into Second Chronicles chapter 7, or 7 or 17. No, chapter 7, verse 15 to 17. There we go. It's
The genealogy's there. You're saying.
well, not necessarily, but it is a funny story if we go back and actually read the what it says in the beginning um, of Luke, and then go and read this in Second Chronicles. What we see is that Nathan is going to speak. Yahweh is talking to Nathan, and so thanks. And he says, "Go and tell David that." Well, first off, it was Saul in First Chronicles, but we're getting beyond that because it's the same thing. Um, that you're going to have that somebody that is your that is of your flesh is going to assume the throne and is going to be the king of Israel, and he will be a son to me, and I will be his father, and and he will sit on the kingdom. And the kingdom of God, by the way, is known as Israel. That's what it is, forever. And then your line will never leave the throne. Basically, will never actually not be the king of Israel, the king of the Jews. And this is what we get. This is also the Son of God reference. So it's not even unique to Jesus in that way, because every single king that is the king of the Jews and is known as the Son of God. And that's why, of course, and Susan's heard me talk about this a lot over the course of the past couple of weeks, because it is really, really important. Not the past couple of weeks, probably the past couple of months. Because Jesus, being a first century apocalypticist, from where he would have known with the Maccabees, from that line of Hasmodia, being taught by John the Baptist, who was also an apocalypticist, would have believed, and we can get this from the things that he says at the Last Supper, that the kingdom of God was going to start very soon, and that he was going to be the king of the Jews, which is, we know that because he actually that was his crime. That's what it said on the cross. And that he even, in something he says even in the book of John, that everybody here is going to be, be a king of the 12 tribes of Judah, the 12 kingdoms. And then I'm going to be over top of that, the king of the kings. And so when we know that, when we see that from what Jesus actually said, and we can see where Jesus did not anticipate to die either, we can look at what we see that Paul, who actually never heard Jesus speak, obviously, and didn't get this information from any of the disciples, we know that, wrote about this as this character Jesus, differently than what we find in some of the forged documents, and even differently than what we find in the hymn that's in Philippians chapter 4. What his actual idea of Jesus was a lower Christology, certainly deified upon his resurrection, which is what Paul, being of Greek, having learned from Greek teachers with a type of duology idea of body and spirit, would have accepted that more readily than maybe a Jew who was from Palestine. So I know we went into a lot. I'm so sorry.
I'm just listening. Like, I'm really like soaking all this in. This is awesome. Like,
probably lost all your subscribers.
Yeah, they're all like, this. He's a heretic. Why are you? They don't think I'm terrible. No, this is awesome. I'm loving it. Like, I mean, like I just in my head, I hear all this, and all it makes me want to do is just like read more and more and more, and like see where maybe you're wrong, maybe you're right. I'd love to. I mean, as of right now, I'd love to just read something and be like, he's dead wrong, but I know that's probably not the case. It's definitely not going to be that easy. You haven't read one book and just regurgitating it. You're clearly like knowledgeable about this. So just all it makes me want to do is just learn more and more, and I think it's awesome. Like, I'd love to like keep interacting, and I mean other people too. I mean, yeah, that's wild, because I know there's so few Christians that know things you just said. And it blows my mind. That's what's like. As the more and more I want to learn, I don't, like, obviously I can't know everything in 2 years, 3 years. It is what it is. I just want to keep learning and see where it goes, and like hearing that just blows me away. That was cool.
Yeah, actually, I have like in my toolbar, right? My bookmark stuff that are on. I thank you, Mega Dirt, for that. For saying still here. I have these are my bookmarks that I currently have up here. So I have a Samsung bookmark because I work for Samsung, and then I have a Funko Pop price guide. One
of my buddies at work is all about the pops. He I told him I wouldn't buy one, and he's already bought me like 3 for my desk. But
that is awesome, because I think I showed this earlier. Because Susan and we just moved into here, but she's got some of hers are right back here behind where we're sitting right now.
I have a Clemson Tiger one, a Deshaun Watson, and a DeAndre Hopkins.
Oh, nice. I have that. I have Luke and Birth, right, which is talking about the birth story in Luke, and then miscellaneous Bible chapters and verses. I have ethics as a social science, and then I have Christian scholarship, which is about I don't know how many web pages are in there. I have Jewish and Christian apocrypha. I have a Greek uh, uh, one, and then I have some for sex education. I also have Josephus, church state separation, church stuff. So I have all of this stuff where I am constantly researching, constantly going in and reading stuff, and then of course, yeah, I don't take um, all of my information from one book. That's a very
Yeah.
bad idea. Which of course, then you're like, oh well, that's what the Bible is. I'm like, nope. Saying the Bible is right because the Bible says so is the opposite of actual critical knowledge. So this is a sick background. Thanks. It's we have new stuff coming in here this week. I finally have somewhere to sit. But this is not going to be here. We have new desks coming in and stuff. We have a lot of stuff that we're going to be doing, and so stay tuned. This will be on our channel, probably not on this one. So
Yeah, probably. Yeah, everybody for sure. Like Eric, I don't know if you know about. He's one of my buddies that's been on stream a few times, so you should go over and subscribe to Divine Disbelief. They're doing some pretty cool stuff over there. So.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I think one thing I did want to, I thought would could lead to like a little bit. So on Twitter, I don't know if you saw, they had like a thing where I forget who it was, but like challenge people to put like 5 people you disagree with who are like the 5 top people. So I'm just curious about like what Christians or people that disagree with you think are like actually doing very good scholarship. Because I mean, I'm sure you would agree that there are some Christians that do good scholarship. I mean, at least I would
Yeah, there are a
assume
lot.
there are some.
There are quite a few. Candida Moss, I think, is a good example of that. She's Roman Catholic. She was at Notre Dame. She was at I think she was at Duke or North Carolina. Now I think she's out on the West Coast. She actually wrote a really great book that actually began my search into the ideas of early Christian persecution, and she does great scholarship though with regard to the Bible and stuff like that. I don't agree with her, but she does great scholarship. Um, uh, some other ones I was reading. Um, need my glasses. What was I reading? Um, oh yeah, I don't agree with anything that Richard Dawkins says about atheism. Does
Yeah,
that
that's
work?
pretty good. Yeah, but
I don't. Yeah, I don't really listen to that. I'm not a big fan of Christopher Hitchens either. Um, uh, I think that as far as apologists go, there aren't very many good ones. Um, but I think that Mike Lacona does great scholarship, and then I think he's a uh, horrible apologist. I think he should stick to the scholarship and not the apologist stuff because he is actually a really great historian. Um,
yeah, so I guess we
uh,
could talk about that a little bit too, if you want. Like, I know, I'm sure a lot of people obviously the resurrection story. Like, what do you think about like the minimal facts? Like, when you hear people start
Garbage.
talking about the minimal facts, do you just like lose? It's just like nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah, garbage. In fact, my first debate with Dean was on um, was on non sequitur show. This was last April, so like a year ago, and it was about the resurrection. Dean and I debated twice about the resurrection, and he, of course, taking the positive position, goes first, and I'm again. This is the first time that I was like, Susan, I don't know if I know what I'm talking about and all this stuff. She's like, you got it. Turns out I had it. And he presented his opening statement, and then at that point, the two people that owned the channel said, "Would you like him to go over anything?" And I unmuted myself, and I said, "I think that's the Habermas and Lacona minimal facts, right?" And he said, "Yep." And I was like, "No, I'm good," because that's the foundation of really crappy apologetics. Um, so somebody was crucified. I don't care. According to Josephus, Varus crucified 2,000 people in was it like 4 or 6 BCE? Sure. Oh, that was interesting.
Yeah, that was my
Uh,
dog. I don't know what just
oh,
happened.
just because they didn't like what they were doing up in Galilee, right? So no, his crucifixion was a normal. I've always said that the Romans were good at two things. One, uh, conquering and crucifying people. The word excruciating comes from the pain you feel in the cross, and as well as creating lead pipes for their water and sewage. Um, and they were really good at those. So I really don't care that somebody died on the cross. In fact, I'm not even a Jesus mythicist. I think Jesus existed. So I'll go with that. Who cares? Um, uh, I don't. Again, of course, I don't believe that anybody died for their faith, and I don't think we have any evidence for it. In fact, the book of Mark is very specific in chapter 14 that they ran away. Bye, which makes sense because they thought that Jesus was going to lead a revolt against the Romans, which is why it was very evident whenever they go to take him, to grab a hold of him, that one of them takes out their sword and swings at a dude. They thought this was the beginning of the revolt. Rise up, And Jesus was like, "What are you doing? Have I said anything that would make you think as though I'm anything but a pacifist? Ignore the fact that I went in the temple and did some stuff. I was just a little bit upset." Uh, and so I don't think that we can show that they were willing to die. Like, how could you say somebody's willing to die for something? Did you ask them yourselves? There's no evidence that this is ever the case. Um, this whole thing is the majority of scholars accept that Jesus died on the cross. Okay. Again, this is something, and also I forget what the like there were we don't have independent attestation of that. No, we don't. We have Mark, and then we have Matthew and Luke who copied from Mark, and then we have John, which is the most amazing of the four. Let's just we have the synoptics, and then we have John, and this isn't independent. This is not independent attestation. John is independent by themselves. I'll give them that, but it also is the one that's most incorrect.
Do you think John? You don't think John? You do think it was independent? Like you don't? Do you think he read the other gospels?
May have.
Thought that
but
was
certainly
an interesting question Pine Creek asked. I was curious.
Yeah, I don't know what her answer was either.
She said maybe.
Yeah, I think it certainly is possible. There are a few things that correlate in there, but also part of that could be the fact that 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 some of that stuff did happen. Not the supernatural stuff, mind you, but some of the other stuff as well. It's certainly, as Susan has put in there, I've called that one Super Jesus for years. He's like in one of the gospels, I think it's in Mark. You have Simon of wherever, he has to help him carry the cross or whatever up to Golgotha, which is it's a fair distance. In John, he's walking around like one arm in it. He's like, I got this, and he's up on the cross talking to people. He looks down at Mary and the disciple who he loved, and he's like, "Hey, is your new mom?" Right? And he's just like, and then he's having like this great day. I'm surprised he didn't start like on the cross, like doing like chin ups and stuff. That's Jesus right there, and that's a huge difference from Mark. So we don't have independent attestation. We don't have anything that is written around the same time. With Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we have these three gospels that serve a common purpose with a common goal in mind, and so we only use like one of them. Obviously, the the Q source for the sayings of Jesus, they matter in Mark and Luke, but that's not independent attestation. All that is the sayings of Jesus, not all of them for sure. And
so that's what you think Q is? It's just like a document with a lot of his sayings.
Yeah,
do you think Q is a thing?
Yeah, I think it is. Q, of course, just means
just saying. Like a collection of things Jesus said or whatever that they all used.
Yeah, the Quell word is German for just sayings.
Okay.
And it's the sayings source. It's just Q. It's just, and that's why it's in Matthew and Luke, but we don't find those things in Mark. And so we have this one source where there's the exact same words from Jesus, and that's all that it is. And then of course we have stuff that Matthew got from a different source, and we got stuff that Luke got from a different source. So realistically, we have with these other sources that exist, probably like 6 altogether, but they're not independent sources. Um, and so we look at that and we're like, so we don't have anything outside of the Bible, period, that even mentions anything except for Jesus was crucified for insurrection, and certainly nothing outside the Bible contemporarily at all that talks about any kind of resurrection or supernatural events. We got plenty speaking about stuff in like 112, 113, but he's writing to the emperor talking about a bunch of other stuff, like just basic. If you read like the entire, all I ever see is like this one little snippet from Pliny talking to not Tiberius, I forget the name of the emperor. They this what the Christians, he's never even met them. He doesn't know what to do. Should I hate them? Should I crucify them? What should I do? And it's in the midst of this other incredible amount of information. Like how should I ensure they're farming properly? How should we do economic stuff? And it's like the one little piece out of this like basic treatise that is hundreds of pages long, and we have this one piece about the Christians. And it's because they weren't. You're talking 100 years after the fact. This is still a rather small cult, and they wouldn't have cared. How many emperors did we even know that even knew they existed? Even especially in Rome, which is a pagan town full of pagan awesomeness. Again, Apollonius is certainly more popular, and so this minimal facts argument it has no valid foundation that I can see across the board. There's certainly no external attestation.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like I'm not a big fan of the minimal facts. Like I used it in my debate and I realized like the more I look into it, like I mean I think it's very overused and like overhyped for sure. I don't think there's too many Christians that even do a lot of research that would disagree with that. I mean, some do, but I think like you said, I don't think the minimal facts. I've come to like I first thought this, but they don't make the atheists like come to a conclusion. Like you have to decide whether it was a hallucination or some. You're not forced into one of those. It's not something like that. I've definitely agreed.
And, I mean, it could have been. I'm more of the conclusion. I've actually held this for a couple of years now. I'm more of the persuasion that Peter, Paul, and Mary saw him, thought they did, which makes sense because Peter, Paul, and Mary are the best three. Let's be honest. And somebody's gonna get that joke in the chat. And I think that if we're talking about this, and I mentioned this last year in my debate with Dean as well, these are what are known as, so there's two different things. We have flashbulb memories. Flashbulb memories occur when something extraordinary happens that is remembered not necessarily just by us, but by sometimes a large number of people. An example of this in most recent memory would be like 9/11, September 11, 2001. I don't know if you were alive for that.
Yeah, I'm 28, so I'm not that young.
Okay, all right. I don't know. And it actually was. I found this last year. I used it in our debate where you have these folks that got together with like a bunch of different universities, and they interviewed people who were there, who were not necessarily like in the buildings or anything, but who had seen it live. And they interviewed them, they got their answers, and then they came back a year later, and then 5 years, and then 10 years later. And what they discovered was that this is a flashbulb memory seared into our minds. And yet, more than 50% of them even said 5 years later that where they were was different, right? And later on, it's like exactly what position they saw something in, or something so, if they saw it right there, which building fell down first was something that the vast majority got wrong. And this is something that again is you would think I could never forget anything about this. The amount of people, of course, when it comes to Pearl Harbor in 1941 as well, some of the same um, some of the same results are discovered. Obviously, this is a vast number of years difference, but we find some of that as well. So we have that, and then we also have a something called bereavement hallucinations, which are incredibly common. And if we consider the amounts of people that are the people that that Jesus was closest to, we consider Mary Magdalene, we consider Peter, right, Cephas, and those two people were closest. They are the ones who would be most effective, most affected, most likely by a by the death of the person that they either loved or that they were best friends with, or were seen to kind of take on the mantle type things. And those are the ones, if we read 1 Corinthians chapter 15 very specifically, it says they appeared to Peter first, even though that's not true. In none of the Gospels does he appear to Peter first. And then to James, and then the other 12, which then doesn't make sense because you have, like, hold on a second, this is more than 12. Um, uh, and in Mary, of course, she's the only one that's mentioned in all four of them, and she's the one who really, if we would consider like a relationship type of thing, she would have been emotionally connected to him. And these are the type of individuals that would be most susceptible to a bereavement hallucination, which is incredibly common, by the way. And then you got Paul. Now you got Saul of Tarsus here. Let's begin that by saying that Saul, who, by the way, his name never changed. I don't know if you've heard that. Um, Saul, that was his name. His name in Greek is Paul. So if anybody ever tells you that was the case, you need to no, stop it.
Because
He,
yeah, I actually I would have. I thought his name changed.
yeah, go
So
to
it
church.
just changed because there when he wrote, and then even Christians agree. I've actually never heard that because it's not really something obviously that's super important to the Christian faith. I'm not we're not talking, but that is interesting and
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
basically
no,
just
no.
because he changed from the Bible author to the bad guy, and when he was
Well,
writing the Bible, it was in Greek. Is
well,
what you're
that's
saying?
what um, his name in Latin is Saul. His name in Greek is Paul. That's it. Um, that's the thing. It's just translation. Like my name is different in Spanish than it is in English. That's just that's all it is. Um, but yeah, they try to make it seem as he did this whole thing because you look at Abram and Abraham and all that nonsense. He did this whole thing where he changed everything about himself, including his name. I'm like, no, that's not true. That's like literally reverse Google Translate that, and it's that name. Um, and uh, we know that he is susceptible to hallucination by himself because we read again in Galatians where he purports to visit the third heaven. You know, and by the way, there's different levels of heaven. If you want to learn about those, I can tell you about that too. That begins in Hebrew mythology and book Genesis, and got that book. If you want, I can get you that book. I've got it right back there. It's fairly academic. I don't recommend it right off. And um, he says he's gone to the third heaven, and he also says he goes up to Sinai by himself, and he has these visions of things. And he actually says more than once that he has had he received information from God multiple times and from Jesus multiple times. This means multiple hallucinations. So this is a person who, or multiple visions. I don't want to make it seem as though it's negative.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. As I hear that, I just think revelations, visions,
Sure.
whatnot. But
Yeah. And so this is something that he would normally have happen, especially if he's somebody who knew about the Christians, and especially if somebody. Now, I don't actually necessarily believe that he was persecuting the Christians because he would not have had the power to do so, especially not from the Roman Empire. And anything that's written about that in the Book of Acts is nonsense. Um, uh, but it's mocking them for their beliefs and going around and he would have known about them. Having a vision like that where he actually believes that it's real is not would not be something that's uncommon for Paul. And so I think that there are, and we actually know that happens, especially with things like PTSD. I mean, I have the same thing myself. Wake up in the middle of the night, and Susan can tell you this, and I don't actually know where I'm at sometimes. And sometimes I see people that aren't there. And of course, if you ask me at that time, guess what? I realize they're there. Like, no, I'm talking to them. They're standing right there, right? And even though in reality, and I wake up the next day and I don't remember it, sometimes I know that they're not. And so it's something that is plausible, certainly more plausible than a person who died and rose from the dead and appeared to me on the road to or I forget where he's going.
Damascus.
Yeah, thank you. I'm usually good at that.
Yeah,
And
I got to throw something in
yeah,
there.
yeah, and so I think those are more plausible, especially given the tests that we've done in bereavement hallucinations, which is actually what it's called, by the way. And so there are certainly more than somebody coming back from the dead, because we have to go with things we know happen before we consider this person rose from the dead. There's a pretty high bar to set, or it already has been set, regarding evidences for plausible explanations. It's not like Jesus was the first person to ever necessarily come back from the dead. I recommend Heracles, by the way. That's usually the one that I give. I don't go with that list nonsense. Stop using that, atheist. It's not a good list. It's also wrong. Heracles is a good example. So,
and my brain is like overloaded with so many things I'm thinking about as you're talking. This was really good. I guess we're like, I don't know. I know I'm kind of like just thinking, I guess, winding down. This was a really good conversation, though. I enjoyed this. I'd like to do it again sometime.
oh, well, thank you. I've enjoyed the opportunity to come on here again, and I don't actually. Usually, the person that bears the brunt of all this stuff is Susan, so you're probably saving her at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the way I said, like I just can't. I honestly can't wait to like go back and listen to this and like I think it's really good for Christians to hear this kind of information. Like this is, it's these. You hear a lot of like pop new atheists or whatever. They bring these arguments that are nowhere near as like. I mean, and I guess that's like where I see like some of the like common apologetics are going after like the common atheist. I mean, that's kind of the way it works. And when you bring arguments like this, like me and my buddy Dry Apologist, I don't know if you've ever seen his channel. It's pretty small.
That's familiar.
Yeah, Apologetic Showdown is what it's called now.
Yeah. I've seen that.
Yeah, and we went through an article by Non-Alchemist on Twitter. He wrote an article about the resurrection that was really interesting. And basically, like, even if the resurrection is true, it doesn't matter. His argument was that, like, Jesus is not the clear fulfillment of the Old Testament, and therefore, like, he's a false prophet, essentially, according to the Bible. So, which was interesting, and we went through some of that stuff, and, like, it was one of, like what you're bringing here, it's a more, like, well thought out, different argument than you hear than just, why did bad stuff happen? There can't be a God, like, these just, like, ridiculous arguments that just are not scholarly at all. And then, so, interacting with, like, arguments like what you're bringing in, what he brought and stuff, it's really, like, sparked my interest recently. So this was, like, a really good conversation to have for sure.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I'll have to look at that article that was written, or that blog post that was written.
Yeah, there's actually two of them. So he wrote one, and then Eric Manning, who's like an apologist, wrote a response. Yeah, and then the only reason I mentioned that is because Non-Alchemist wrote another post responding to his. But it's a really short article. It's just a different approach than other like skeptics will use. So it was interesting. Yeah, I definitely recommend checking it out.
Yeah, I will, for sure. Eric and I have met. I don't mean to. Okay. I don't mean to make it seem like it's a horrible thing, but I just like our conversation. He kept trying to get into philosophy. I'm like, I don't do philosophy.
Okay.
That was like one of the. I don't do philosophy. Stop trying to get the philosophical epistemology. I don't talk about philosophy, and that was last January. I'm like, no, go do philosophy with somebody else. Go do it with Steve McRae. I don't care. Not me. And I was just like, man. So. He's good at that. I don't think he's great at the historical stuff, but his venue, obviously I'm not good at philosophy, so we all have our areas of strengths and stuff where we have opportunities. So, but no, this has been a truly fun and exciting experience on here speaking with you. Yeah, and I certainly hope to speak with you in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, corgis.
Yeah, no, you got dogs barking. I'm not the only one. I have a Jack Russell, so she's pretty crazy.
Oh yeah, yeah. Corgis are they're you know when you hear them. So
Yeah. Well, cool. I guess we can end it here. I really appreciate you coming on. I wish you the best on your channel, and thank you everybody that was in the stream. Mega Dirk, do you know who he is? I saw you mention him. I don't know if you know him, but he helped me build my computer, so appreciate
well, there you
it.
go.
Matt
Yeah.
hooked me up with some random German who called me on the phone and built my computer for me, so that's
Well,
the
hey, there
reason
you
I'm
go.
able to do this.
There you go. Awesome. Well, I'm happy they're able to help you out. And yeah, I see. I think it's, oh yeah, I was trying to look for stats. I was like, oh, never mind. I can't see that from this end.
Yeah,
But I
cool,
am.
man.
Yep. And yeah, I look forward to watching some of the other stuff. I know that you had that debate on there the other day, and I don't. Again, it's not my thing.
It was just it was basically just philosophy debate. So.
Yeah, but I definitely you had mentioned like a certain Discord. I am earlier, and I am interested in that. If you want to.
Okay, well I'll shoot you the link.
Something.
Yeah, I would love to have you in there. There's like it's like getting up there. Like I said, it started out as like pretty just for fun TikTok atheists and like attacking, which are apparently like I had no idea about this until I went on there. But like there's just a lot of like very low level Christians that like get tons and tons of views on TikTok, so it like made a lot of people angry.
Oh well, I mean, I guess whatever the people like, give them what they like, right?
Yeah. So.
Yeah, but that'll be fun for me. I'd be like, oh yeah, this. Oh, okay, I recognize this. So yeah, that'll be a good time, and I think you'll see that I'm usually detailed in what I write and what I say, but also am rarely antagonistic in my opening conversations. Rarely, sometimes.
Yeah, I could say. I mean, you were definitely. This was enjoyable for me, so that's what I got to say. So
awesome. Well, I tell you, you have a great night.